For over a decade, the old house on Hollow Creek Road was just there, windows coated in dust, grass growing wild, mailbox stuffed with faded flyers. Locals whispered about the man who once lived there, how he vanished without a word one winter night. But no one could have imagined what lay beneath its foundation. It wasn't until a group of contractors entered the property for demolition that the truth began to surface. The basement door was sealed shut. What they found behind it would send detectives on a case darker than any they've faced before. Robert Kelman wasn't the kind of man you remembered. Quiet, clean-cut, and impeccably punctual. He moved into the modest two-story house on Hollow Creek Road in the fall of 1996. The neighbors called him the professor, though no one knew exactly what he did for work. He never mentioned it. Every morning at precisely 7:15, he'd walk to his mailbox with a thermos in one hand and the newspaper tucked under his arm. He always nodded politely, but never stayed to chat. To those who lived nearby, Robert was a mystery wrapped in politeness. His yard was always trimmed, his windows always closed. No parties, no visitors. Sometimes a faint humming could be heard from his basement late at night, but no one paid much attention. In a small town, everyone minds their own business until they can't. It was January 15th, 2007, when Robert vanished. A neighbor noticed his garbage bins hadn't been taken to the curb, a small thing, but unusual for a man so methodical. Days passed, then weeks. His car, a silver Buick, sat untouched in the driveway, gathering frost. Flyers were pinned to telephone poles, and local police conducted a wellness check. They found the door locked, no sign of forced entry. Inside, everything was eerily still. Food in the fridge, slippers by the fireplace. No signs of a struggle, no note. Authorities filed it as a voluntary disappearance. After all, there was no body, no blood, no broken windows, just a missing man and a house left in limbo. But the questions lingered like a chill in the air. Where did Robert Kelman go? And why did he leave everything behind? The house would sit undisturbed for years to come until someone finally looked beneath it. As the seasons passed, nature reclaimed the edges of Robert Kelman's property. Ivy crept up the brick facade, shutters sagged, the once neat lawn turned wild, buzzing with insects in summer and blanketed with leaves in fall. Children stopped riding their bikes near the corner. Adults didn't speak of the house unless they had to. But teenagers turned it into legend. They called it the Kelman Crypt, a place where dares were made and courage was tested. Some claimed they'd peeked through broken windows and seen strange shadows move across the walls. Others swore they heard whispers coming from the vents. One boy, shaking, insisted he'd heard pounding beneath the floorboards, like fists trying to punch through the concrete from below. The rumors grew with every retelling. Satanic rituals, secret tunnels. One story said Kelman had been a CIA agent who disappeared because he knew too much. Another swore he was hiding somewhere in the house the whole time, watching. The property was caught in legal limbo after Robert was declared missing. With no will and no known relatives, the city seized it after years of unpaid taxes. Several times, real estate agents tried to sell it off, but deals fell through mysteriously. One potential buyer backed out after touring the basement, claiming he felt watched. Another had a panic attack in the front hallway and never explained why. Contractors refused to do repairs. Even squatters didn't stick around for long. One man who broke in during the winter was found days later in the woods, barefoot and muttering nonsense. He kept repeating, "Don't go." In the basement, the house sat, growing older and darker with every passing year. Until, in 2023, the city had finally had enough and ordered it torn down. No one expected what they'd uncover beneath the dust and decay. It was a cold morning in March 2023 when the demolition crew arrived at the Kelman property. The air hung thick with anticipation and something else. Maybe it was superstition, maybe just unease. But more than one contractor hesitated before crossing the rotting threshold. Their task was simple: clear out the debris, get the interior, prep the structure for full teardown. It didn't stay simple for long. One of the workers, Tommy Alvarez, was pulling drywall from the kitchen when he noticed something strange. A draft not from a broken window or vent, but from somewhere lower. He followed it past a stack of boxes, down a narrow hallway, and into the pantry. Behind a shelf, partially obscured by shelving and old tarps, was a metal hatch. A basement door, oddly placed and sealed shut with rusted bolts, a thick chain, and several industrial-grade padlocks. No one had ever mentioned a second basement entrance. When the crew reported it to their supervisor, protocol said to call it in. But curiosity proved stronger. They spent nearly an hour grinding through the locks. When the final bolt clanged to the floor, they paused. The hatch creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into blackness. What hit them first was the smell. Damp, metallic, like mold, and something else. Something that clung to your lungs. Flashlights flickered as they descended. The steps were coated in grime, the walls narrowing as they went down. And then they reached at a steel-reinforced door, half buried behind insulation panels. It, too, was locked, but this time from the outside. Someone had wanted to keep whatever was inside in. Once breached, the chamber revealed itself. A small, concrete room. Windowless, soundproof, the air was thick, unmoving. Along the walls, ancient recording equipment, analog cameras bolted into corners. Rows of dusty monitors. Dozens of VHS tapes stacked neatly in crates labeled only by date. A metal chair bolted to the center of the floor, restraint still intact. And in the far corner, bones. Human bones, arranged carefully. What had started as a simple demolition had become something far more sinister. And the worst part, this was only the beginning. Crime scene tapes soon wrapped around the Kelman house like a noose. Forensic vans replaced bulldozers, and the demolition was halted indefinitely. The town watched in horror as news spread. A hidden chamber had been discovered beneath the home, one not listed on any blueprints. A room, meticulously constructed to conceal whatever occurred inside. Investigators were stunned by its complexity. The soundproofing was nearly flawless, layers of insulation, lead sheeting, even padding inside the door hinges. Whoever built it knew exactly how to hide screams. The room was cold, sterile, clinical in its organization. The chair at the center was bolted to the floor, with worn leather straps on the arms and legs. Nearby, a tray held rusted surgical tools, a cracked mirror, and an ancient reel-to-reel recorder. Thick cables snaked across the ceiling into a fuse box labeled "Private Do Not Open." But it was the bones that stopped everyone cold. Some were old, dried, fragile like papery, others disturbingly recent. Forensics would later confirm at least for distinct sets of human remains in the room. All adults, all deceased within different time frames. One skeleton bore marks on the wrist consistent with prolonged restraint. Another had metal wire threaded through the jawbone. Then came the journal, buried beneath a floorboard, wrapped in plastic and bound in cracked leather, was a small notebook filled with tightly scrawled writing. It was signed by Robert Kelman. The entries began mundane. Notes about sound isolation, camera angles, electrical wiring. Then they shifted. Subject 3 is responding to light deprivation. Sound experiment successful. Fear-induced hallucinations noted. No names, no identities. They must remain vessels. The deeper investigators read, the darker it became. Kelman hadn't just hidden his crimes. He had documented them, studied them. Whatever he'd been doing down there wasn't just torture, it was experimentation. And those VHS tapes, they were next. When detectives began cataloging the VHS tapes found in the basement, they quickly realized they weren't just dealing with evidence, they were staring into the abyss. Over 200 tapes, each marked only with a date, some stretching back as far as 1997. The earliest footage was grainy, shot with a static-mounted camera fixed to a corner of the room. It showed the chair, empty at first, then not. The first subject was a man, early 30s, visibly confused, bound, gagged. Over the next hours, sometimes days, Kelman would enter the frame, face always obscured by shadows or masks. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was calm, clinical. He wasn't interrogating. He was observing. Each tape documented a new test: isolation, sensory overload, light deprivation, electrostimulation, exposure to white noise for days at a time. Some tapes showed multiple subjects in succession, men and women of various ages. None ever left the room as investigators watched. The horror compounded. One tape showed a woman restrained and forced to listen to the same dissonant chord on loop for 72 hours. Another captured Kelman injecting something into a subject's neck, then monitoring their reaction with a stopwatch. The screams weren't edited out. They were cataloged. Even more chilling were the notes found scrawled on the tape labels. Subject 12, high threshold for pain, broke after 6 days. Subject 19, panic on set after 43 minutes of silence. Subject 34, refused to respond. Terminated. The FBI was brought in. Old missing persons reports were reopened. Faces from decades past were matched with frames from the footage drifters, hitchhikers, the forgotten. Robert Kelman hadn't vanished in 2007. He had simply stopped needing to hide. His work, as he called it, was nearly complete. But what was his end game? And more importantly, where had he gone? In the weeks that followed the discovery, the Kelman house became the epicenter of a media storm. Reporters circled like vultures. Psychologists, criminologists, even conspiracy theorists weighed in. Some called Robert Kelman a madman, others a methodical monster. But the question on everyone's mind was the same. How could this have gone unnoticed for so long? DNA analysis confirmed the identities of 5 victims, all listed in various missing persons databases from the late 90s and early 2000s. For families who had waited years for closure, the news came as both a relief and a new trauma. Their loved ones had suffered unimaginable fates, but not all the remains could be matched. The skeletons yielded no hits, even against international databases, and investigators feared there could be more victims buried in the nearby woods or beneath concrete poured decades earlier. Cadaver dogs were brought in. The area was excavated. Still, Kelman himself remained a ghost. There was no body, no evidence of death, no farewell note. Neighbors reported a strange man seen behind the house in 2011, years after Kelman's supposed disappearance. The sighting was never confirmed. Other reports, later deemed unreliable, suggested he'd fled the country or assumed a new identity. To this day, no one knows where he is. Some believe he died in the forest beyond Hollow Creek, his body lost to time. Others fear he's still alive, still experimenting somewhere new. The Kelman house was demolished 6 months after the investigation concluded. The lot now sits vacant, a patch of grass where darkness once lived. But for those who remember, the silence in that spot is louder than ever. Because monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they build their own.